With respect to starting a business and looking at the strategy for the entrepreneur as to what they want to accomplish, how they want to raise money, what their goal is, how would you advise, Jocelyn, that an entrepreneur goes about selecting the proper legal structure? How would you advise that?
Sure. Well, some things that Lars touched on are potential liabilities and the importance of setting up an entity to kind of shield you. And I know Lars can speak more to the corporate structure. As far as intellectual property goes, it's important both to recognize what rights other people might have and what fences they could have put up that you want to be aware of so you don't infringe on their rights. And it's also important to find out what your intellectual property is and what you can do to protect it, as far as registering patents and trademarks and copyrights, and also as far as putting agreements in place where that's appropriate to clarify that you own the work, for example, of someone that you hired to create something for you that's intellectual property. Because intellectual property can be an asset and it's part of the valuation of your company, so it's important to protect intellectual property as assets.
Okay, so staying with the discussion regarding the advantages of some of these structures, I know there's a lot of buzz, and Lars, you mentioned incorporating or setting up or forming a limited liability in Delaware and Nevada. What are some of the advantages that certain states offer as opposed to other states when it comes to forming an LLC or a corporation?
So there are slight differences between all the states, and I don't know all the differences, but what we often compare is Delaware versus California. Now, if you set up a Delaware entity, you might still be subject to some of the California laws anyway. So you sort of you want to leave California, and then you're sort of stabbed in the back halfway to Delaware. But in general, Delaware is more protective of the board. It's less protective of minority shareholders relative to California law. And there's also an expedited appeals process. Delaware law is considered to be sort of the top or the most developed corporate code in the world. So and many other states are trying to emulate Delaware, so it has a little bit of a cachet to it that way. But in terms of setting up a corp, in terms of protection of liability, it's the same. Now, because it's less protective of minority shareholders, that being one, and more protective of the board, VCs would almost always end up in Delaware. And if you look at it, I think 85% of all public entities are Delaware corporations. There are also some differences in terms of tax treatment. You have minimum franchise tax in California. I think it is still $800, but that applies regardless of whether you have a California entity or a Delaware entity. It's based on whether you're doing business in California and a test. So in Delaware, the franchise tax is calculated a little bit differently.
See, that's very compelling when you